Okay. How's everybody doing today? I'm tired. Shit. We're gonna watch a video called "We Don't Talk About Dan Schneider" from Quentin Reviews. Great channel, actually. I really highly recommend it. So yeah, let's watch it. And I will be eating, so you could get all the great crunchy noises with this sound video. Video. These crunchy chips. I like this style because it really just shows so much shit.
On September the 17th, 1986, the teen sitcom Head of the Class first premiered on ABC. The series was a twist on older legacy sitcoms of the decade before, specifically Welcome Back, Kotter, which had featured a soft-hearted teacher taking over a class of slow-witted delinquents while finding promise in each of them and teaching them to find personal ambition. Head of the Class sought to be the subversive opposite of this cliche. In the series, substitute teacher Charlie Moore finds himself permanently taking over a study period at Millard Fillmore High, a class which openly exists solely so the smartest kids at school can study for their academic team. However,
This has to feel with somebody.
Moore finds the group to be pompous, asocial, and
I've never watched a show in my life.
Teen experiences. They don't go on dates, don't do school events, and basically they're all so dedicated to academics that they have no lives. He suggests that they have a lot of developing to do, especially when it comes to Janice Lazaretto, a 10-year-old who skipped several grades and is considered the smartest student in the class.
This is a cliche already, right? Like,
But you're cutting into our time, Mr. Moore.
Janice, you're only 10 years old. Time is all you've got.
Mr. Moore encourages them to commit to living normal teenage lives while he attempts to teach them anyways. He shows them that an ability to memorize and recite facts does not match his actual real-world experience, as he was actually present at many of the historical events he discusses in the classroom.
I'm going to read these over the weekend, and Monday we start with the Chicago demonstrations.
Aren't they referred to as the Chicago riots?
Well, we were demonstrating. A large number of people in uniform were rioting.
Mr. Moore has a tendency to
I feel
use
that.
lessons on tangents which seem totally meaningless at first, before eventually revealing them to be an essential.
like I feel that in some ways of just like, dude, all these shows are like, yeah, so we are, people complain about wokeness and shit now, but it's like, shows have been doing that for like ever, since the existence of shows. Wokeness, Jesus Christ, give me a break.
Essential part of understanding a lesson or piece of the wider story. His talents as a speaker are proven time and time again by his ability to get a class of know-it-alls who think they have nothing left to learn to listen endlessly to his long stories. But Moore is not without his limitations. He had previously moved to the coast after high school in order to pursue a profession in the theater, but his hopes and ambitions had been crushed. Throughout the series,
Like every fucking millennial. Like seriously, again, hey, time change, but times don't change, right?
he has to occasionally juggle his insistence that the kids can do whatever they seek to achieve with his own failure to live out that promise. In several memorable episodes, he also helps the students put on famous plays, essentially acting as if he were the school's theater teacher. Head of the Class ran for 5 long seasons, despite being set in a high school and supposedly starring upperclassmen. By the end of the show, most of the cast were between 25 to 30, and all
Makes
were
sense.
still role-playing as if they were 17-year-olds.
Okay,
And as
that's
I'm
a little-
sure you can imagine, with a cast of 11 leads who were not consistent for the entire run of the show, it wasn't uncommon for the writers to shuffle the deck in terms of who was being matched with whom for either romantic subplots or comedic banter. But very quickly,
Where is Dan Schneider?
2 characters became paired up with extreme consistency.
Oh, that guy.
Arvid Engen and Dennis Blunden. Arvid is a mathematician, a bookworm, and someone who's in love with a popular girl at school and does not hide it.
I'm smart and funny looking. It's a deadly combination.
Albert Einstein.
Hey, so am I. So I'm a VTuber. Hey.
Smart and funny looking, right? Marilyn Monroe said that he was the sexiest man she ever met.
Unfortunately, Marilyn Monroe is no longer in the dating pool.
While Dennis is a cynical yet excitable prankster, obsessed with technology and the impact it might leave on future generations.
I'm not stupid. I know why I'm overweight. It's anxiety. As a future physicist, I'm on a collision course with destiny. They're probably going to use me to create some sort of super weapon to annihilate mankind, and I won't be able to stop it.
Nope.
Both become quickly known for their flippant attitude, often leading to swordplay and disagreements.
Okay.
Great physical comedy is derived from the fact that, to put it bluntly, Dennis is very large and Arvid is very thin. But despite how they might disagree, the pair always seem to make up, because they are brothers in some way. Dennis is infamous for quite a few things in the show. He borrows money recklessly and never pays it back. He lies without need and gets caught in massive drama because of it, and he often has to deal with the repercussions of his various pranks.
So he just Dan Schneider by himself. Got it. Completely understand that. Okay. Completely 100% got it.
Or comedy material not landing quite right.
You don't think it's funny? I'm not laughing, Dennis.
Ooh,
See,
not
there's a
laughing.
difference between you and me. I take the existentialist point of view. Life is a joke. Do you know about existentialism?
No, Dennis, I just got here from Mars. You want to play funny philosophy?
Ooh.
Do you know Dante's The Divine Comedy? Because Dante says there are 9 levels of hell.
That's a comedy?
Several other important stories include the one where Dennis gets a job working at a diner to help pay back the money he owes all his friends, the double-length event episode where the
What the hell?
entire class gets to go overseas for a big competition, and the episode where Dennis tries to get his classmate Maria to help him write an essay for a big scholarship fund, only for their plans to get held up by Maria's new boyfriend, Chuck.
When you really think about it, Dennis, life is short. And can we be honest? We are on this planet to party.
Is that Brad Pitt? Is
I don't think Nietzsche could have said it better.
Chuck, in simple words, is an idiot. He's a complete buffoon with no standing and no future, and he's played by the exact person you think he is.
Look, Maria, I don't know, but I'm getting a little worried here that you have more interest for your schoolwork than you do in the old Chuck dog here.
No, that's not true.
Chuck isn't interested in dating a girl who is more intelligent than him, someone who's interested in books and learning rather than having fun and partying.
And that's my
so
type.
Maria begins faking being stupid whenever he's around. Dennis uses this to his advantage, taking her name off of their award-winning paper while using the excuse that he's doing this to stop Chuck from finding out how smart she is. Eventually, Maria decides that she can't keep lying about who she really is, and she reveals the truth, causing Chuck to break up with her. Now, 2 other notable characters who survive to the end of the series are Simone, played by Christine Hadje, and Eric, played by Brian Robbins.
Watch this. 30 August of 1980.
Ozzy Osbourne eats his first rat on stage.
hey. Yeah.
That's why you're not on the team, Eric.
I'm not on the team because I don't want to be on the team.
Eric is the bad boy of Millard Fillmore High, the delinquent who wants nothing to do with this preppy class of nerds or their academic team. However, testing has proven that he has a gifted mind, and his mother forces him to stay in the class to better himself. Simone is quite the different story. She's
It's not too bad.
reserved, shy, and kind.
Like, I feel like I should watch the show. It's 5. So the show's 5 seasons. I should watch the show eventually at some point. I feel like it will be dated completely, but I mean, like, Saved by the Bell's still pretty good, and I feel like this would be good too. Probably.
Cites certain pieces from memory and is a natural romantic.
It can't be worse than Parker Lewis Can't Lose. Like, right?
At heart. Throughout the series, Eric and Simone start a torrid romance, constantly dating, breaking up, reconciling, becoming friends, before dating again and starting it all over. This cycle was disrupted during an important event story in Season 4, when Simone and Dennis instead began dating. In the episode, we learned that the class had recently taken a field trip to the Statue of Liberty, only for the ship to rock and Simone to be knocked overboard into the bay, completely unconscious. Dennis had then hopped overboard to save her from drowning.
That's kind of cool.
She begins dating him to show her
So it's like, you know, nerd saves girl. Girl falls in love with him. Cool. I mean, I feel like that's overdone. But I guess then it wasn't. So, yeah, that seems pretty doable in a lot of instances.
appreciation for him saving her life. This is something Dennis feels indulgent about before he develops a bad feeling about the whole thing.
Oh no, Dennis, I really like you.
I don't feel right about it. I mean, what if I hadn't saved your life? I mean, what then?
But you did.
But you did.
2 days ago, you put your life at risk to save another's. How can I not like that? Oh, it's the ultimate test of honor, of decency, of goodness. Face it, Dennis. You're good.
Yeah?
Dennis eventually admits that she only nearly drowned because he accidentally hit her on the head with a life preserver while trying to rescue her, causing her to become enraged that she let things get as far as them dating for something so stupid. But despite this, thanks to Mr. Moore, they're able to end the episode on relatively good terms. By most accounts, Dennis Blunden was not the most groundbreaking character in the history of sitcoms.
Sounds very generic.
From the same decade, you're likely to find a lot of other scheming, funny guys acting out of selfish gain before learning a lesson that they won't retain. But perhaps the most notable thing about Head of the Class and this character was the actor behind it all, a young 20-something by the name Daniel Schneider. Although it's important to say that this wasn't the first role that Daniel had in the entertainment industry. Years before,
I mean, that's
sitcom
just should be
started,
good.
He had appeared in a long string of random bit roles, which included an infamous sex comedy film, that being 1985's Hot Resort.
I never watched that.
Remember, our motto here at the Royal St. Kitts is the guest is always.
I was thinking of what's that show? There's a movie he was in, and I cannot think of it. But it's not Secret Admirer. It's a different movie. Cannot think of it. I think it's the first movie I saw of him.
You're an asshole. Then you're an asshole.
Weren't you
Jesus Christ, he looks young.
in a movie with Fay Ray? I don't suppose you'd like to go to the movies tonight.
Fuck off.
Well, I guess a blowjob would really be out of the question then.
Fuck you.
Fuck me, well that's kind of what I had in mind. You know, which way do you like it? Because I got the People's Almanac, and it lists the 6 most favorite popular positions with women, especially women like you. I can tell because you have that kind of body.
Have you been with a woman?
Yeah.
What the fuck is this? What the hell is this shit?
But it was indisputably head of the class, which gave Schneider the connections and momentum to begin a long-term career in Hollywood. In 1988, Schneider and his co-star, Brian Robbins, were invited to co-host what most would call the very first Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards.
Okay.
It was this brief gig performed in front of a live audience at Universal Studios Hollywood that would totally change the trajectory of both men's lives. The award show was produced by a man named Albie Hecht, who soon formed a close friendship with both Schneider and Robbins. Hecht would eventually become the head of production at Nickelodeon, and would in turn invite his friends to come work on Nickelodeon productions.
That's
However,
cool.
the pair had to turn such invitations down, as head of the class was an ABC project, meaning they were obligated to that network until their contracts expired. Luckily for them, that exact situation would come just 3 years later.
Ooh.
After 5 years on ABC, the kids from Head of the Class finally graduate. But the ceremony you'll see on the air wasn't half again as emotional as when the actors said goodbye after taping the final show.
We've been doing this for a long time, and it means everything to me.
Like 5 years on a show is like a long time. Like that's longer than high school. That's longer than most colleges. Like, jeez.
Daniel Schneider's mom missed his real graduation. She showed up for this.
That is just a long time.
With the Dan look, I made it this time. So I've been harassing her for about 7 years now for not making it. Now I can't say anything.
Ladies and gentlemen, the graduating class of Fillmore High School.
Yeah.
Ended, Brian Robbins formed a production studio alongside Michael Tollin, a producer and director who had been making sports documentaries as far back as 1978.
Sports documentaries.
Albie Hecht invited Robbins to pitch to him a children's television series that could be produced by their new production studio to air on Nickelodeon. Robbins quickly conceived of what was essentially Saturday Night Live, but for children. The series was soon given the name All That, and Schneider was brought onto the project to serve as head writer. By the end of the show's second episode,
Like, I think that's a cool thing.
The team had struck gold.
Like, first off, the show, after like watching it, it's funny. It's really funny. Like, even now, it's still funny. But it's funny in the sense that I thought those kids were having a good time. And when I was younger watching it as a kid, I was like, oh, I want to be that. Because they look like they're having a good time. Now, looking back, it's weird. It's pretty weird. Some of them. How? Oh, see, that's such a classic.
In 1996, Schneider would write the pilot episode
Classic.
of the All That spin-off, Kenan and Kel. The show would feature another deep-cut connection to Head of the Class. As Kenan's skittish boss in the series, Chris Potter, is played by the same actor that had starred as...
Okay, that's where I recognize the guy from. Okay, yes, because I fucking love Kenan and Kel growing up.
Arvid back in the 1980s.
See, be quiet. Kenan, this is coming out of your paycheck. Now clean up these puffs pronto.
The dude was funny. The dude's funny. I love it.
Well, see to it that you don't.
Both Robbins and Schneider would appear in different Season 1 episodes as guest performers. But outside of this, Schneider rarely worked on Kenan and Kel, as he both retained his position as head writer of All That, and he began writing his first feature film, to be directed by Brian Robbins. This was, of course,
Good Burger, which is a
with this string of
good movie.
successes were some odd bumps along the way. In 1994, Schneider would deliver one of his final standalone performances when he appeared in Tanya and Nancy, The Inside Story. This was one of the first docudrama films made about the career of Tanya Harding and the assault of Nancy Kerrigan. The film aired in
Never seen this before.
1994, less than 4 months from the incident in question. And in
Don't you all just love it when you're watching, you know, something on YouTube, and then it just hits you with like 3 or 5 more topics you want to go over, and you have like, okay, well, I'm gonna watch this, I'm gonna watch this, I'm gonna watch that. It's just amazing. I think that's amazing. I completely think it's amazing So because now I have like what, a show, a movie to watch, a documentary series to watch. It's just amazing to me.
It is obviously extremely
It's
rushed together.
great
In the film, Schneider
in some
plays
ways.
Tanya's bodyguard, Sean Eckerd.
Call Shane. What? Just call Shane. Listen to me, you moron. If you can't handle the job, maybe we'll just hire somebody else. Listen. Okay.
What the fuck is this? Maybe it's a little less. Maybe it's a little less good.
Yeah, man. I'm gonna pop on down to Phoenix, $4 grand, open up this nice new place, mirrors on the wall.
Yeah, I'll bust. Live with it.
You tell Galuli, if he doesn't come up with the rest of my money, I'm gonna break his legs.
In
What the fuck is
Schneider
this?
left all that to focus his efforts on creating his very first sitcom. The series would be titled Guys Like Us and would air on the United Paramount Network, or UPN.
United
I can't
Paramount
believe
Network.
She cheated on me. This
Okay.
never happened to me before. Happens to me all the time.
I feel that.
Yeah, but you.
Guys Like Us is about Jared Harris, who has to raise his kid brother Maestro after their father decides to move to Venezuela for work. Jared often has to juggle the frustrations of maintaining a dating life in the city with the responsibilities of raising his little brother. The show was a massive flop, with consistently low ratings and a finale that never even broadcast. And so, Schneider pivoted, taking over a pilot project intended for an All That cast member named Amanda Bynes. Thus, The Amanda Show was born, starting a new era of success when it came to the works of Dan Schneider. When the series ended in 2002, Schneider helped create 2 different shows to
Do y'all think
succeed it.
that maybe Dan Schneider had huge resentment that he could not make it past kids' TV? Like, he continuously tried to go past kids' TV, and it just he sucked. So maybe he had resentment because he couldn't make it in a big pond, so he had to live in a small pond and have excess power doing that. I feel like that's an insane amount of power to give somebody with that type of resentment and stuff, I guess.
Drake and Josh, which aired on Nickelodeon, and What I Like About You, which aired on the WB. What I Like About You is about Val Tyler, who has to raise her kid sister Holly after their father decides to move to Japan for work. Holly often has to juggle the frustrations of maintaining a
And honestly, I loved What I Like About You. It was a good show.
dating life in the city with the responsibilities of raising her teenage sister. His work on Drake and Josh would lead Schneider to create a sister show titled Zoe 101, which would give him the momentum to later create many other projects, such as Victoria, Sam and Cat, Henry Danger, and of course, iCarly. iCarly is about Spencer Shea, who has to raise his kid sister Carly after their father decides.
Okay, I feel like there's a sense of a pattern of just, hey, older sibling has to raise younger sibling. Is that all Dan Schneider knows how to write or do or pitch? Because, geez, I just realized that.
Decides to move vaguely overseas for work. Spencer often has to juggle the frustrations of maintaining a dating life in the city with the responsibilities of raising his teenage sister. But also the internet's in there somewhere. Who can forget such classic original episodes as the story where Sam begins working at a fast food place to help pay back the money she owes all her friends? The double-linked event episode where the entire gang gets to go overseas for a big competition.
And then you realize that this episode, it's called I Go to Japan, or I Go to Tokyo, one of those, kind of sucked. Like, there's funny moments, but it just didn't hit. And I don't know if that was a thing back then, but it didn't hit. I can't remember if it was like, I don't know, it didn't hit for me. I already watched it recently, and it just didn't hit the same way not even the same way. It didn't hit at all. I was kind of like, ooh, that sucks.
The episode where Carly begins dating a boy who is smart and tries to hide the fact that she's stupid, and he ends up breaking up with her when he...
Wow. It's almost like these plots are really similar to the show that Dan Schneider was on.
finds out the truth. Or the episode where Carly starts dating Freddy after he saves her life, something he feels indulgent about before he develops a bad feeling about the whole thing. Dan Schneider's work was exceptional because he didn't need to study sitcom culture. He had lived sitcom culture. He knew the tropes like the back of his hand, when to borrow ideas from old classics, and when to satirize and subvert. Sure, it's wholesome and endearing when the teacher with a failed background in theater is a wise mentor beyond his years. But what if instead he was just insane and borderline a threat to everyone around him? Sure, usually you expect characters like Dennis Blunden, fueled by selfish schemes, will learn a lesson and get their comeuppance. But sometimes it's fun if every character is Dennis, and there is no lesson, and there is only chaos.
Yeah.
30 years after the premiere
But
of all that,
no.
the impact the
Gets
series
annoying.
had on the careers of everyone involved is impossible to deny. Today, Brian Robbins, the same man who was once the edgy bad boy on Head of the Class, who hosted the first Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards, produced All That, Kenan and Kel, and directed Norbit, is the CEO of Paramount Pictures and Nickelodeon.
Wait,
In many respects,
that's the same dude? Oh, shit. Okay. Now I've seen a picture. Yeah, I can see that. That's kind of insane, to be honest.
Brian Robbins has become Paramount's own Lorne Michaels, with his influence and impact through his producing credits being almost immeasurable. And this ongoing power that he still wields in the industry highlights a certain awkward absence. In just under 25 years at the network, Dan Schneider became arguably one of the most influential voices in children's entertainment, alongside being one of the most successful sitcom creators of that entire decade. And he's also a person that we don't talk about.
Yeah.
This has caused one of the
Until
most
now.
contentious discrepancies in Nickelodeon
Until
history.
now.
Dan Schneider's work is almost universally loved by contemporary audiences. You might not like every Schneider's project to ever release, but for nearly every single one, every single thing that he worked on, you can find someone from the time who will call it the greatest thing to ever be put out by Nickelodeon. However, Schneider is not exactly someone with a clean record, and so people.
Oh, he looks tired and old as shit in this video.
Divorce him from his own content, and the reason is that doing this is one of the only ways that we can go on thinking so highly of a huge chunk of material from our childhoods. It's
Just
a lot
insane.
harder to rewatch the Good Burger movie or any classic episodes of Zoe 101 or iCarly or Victorious if they just remind you of the rather disastrous allegations which have since been
Dan Warp,
made
there it
against
is.
the man behind it all. And
Have
so,
to showcase
we
that
don't
in
talk about
all the
him on the
shows.
show. We don't
Dan
speak
Warp.
his name, we don't remember his face, and we don't think of his creations as coming from anywhere, having any source. Unless there's a problem with one of these projects, something infamous that we're not fond of. In that case, we're all far too ready to shake our fists in the air and take his name in vain. But as I discovered, the further we get into Schneider's output, the harder it becomes to forget that he exists. To not look at his properties through the lens of something created by him is to deny them their actual content. And all to just keep up this lie that the library of Dan Schneider still works in the modern decade, when, in many ways, that arguably isn't always the case.
Okay. Can we talk about this? My whole my head's covering for the most part the foot. But why is it always a foot? Why is it always a fucking foot? That's weird, right? Like, that's weird. That's weird.
And so today, I am going to break the only rule of analyzing the NSU. I am going to talk about Dan.
Again, another foot.
Schneider. So when I started working on this miniseries back in 2020, there were a lot of things that I could not have anticipated. Now, I always wanted to end the series with a conversation about this topic. I wanted to end things right here. But a lot has changed. We have a lot more information than we used to. But the main thing is that this has all become a lot more personal to me. And I don't mean personal in the sense that it's serious now and it wasn't serious before. I mean that I often feel like I have become trapped in the gravitational force of the collapsing star that is Dan Schneider. Because of that, the video I'm going to make today is explicitly not the video I would have made in 2021. And additionally, I think it's very important that we start things off by laying down some very basic ground rules.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
These rules are very important to me, and I think a lot of people are going to disagree with my rules. But I decided to set some base standards.
What are the rules, Quentin?
That I have come up with. Rule number 1. I don't want to get sued. This rule will influence all of my other rules. Rule number 2. I will only be discussing claims and allegations which have an actual source. Things that are on the record, that have been said in interviews, in articles, in books, in documentaries. If it comes from an anonymous source giving tips to a TikTok creator or some forum post on a shady website, no. I'm sorry, but no, absolutely not. Rule number 3, and this is the big one, if someone insists that they did not experience abuse on these sets or with any of these people, I'm not going to call them liars, I'm not going to accuse them of having Stockholm Syndrome, and I'm not going to put them on blast for that. And if someone thinks that they aren't a part of the overarching narrative of abuse at Nickelodeon, I'm not going to include their story in this video. I've been keeping my ear to the ground about this conversation for a while now, and I found a lot of the discourse kind of frustrating privately, and the main reason is that in recent years, this topic has really been picked up by true crime YouTube. Which is a polite way of saying that people are making shit up for fun. Because in the true crime podcast scene, it is common to exaggerate,
Okay, I do have some critiques about that whole genre, but yeah.
Fill in the blanks a little. Hey, if this one thing is true, who knows what might else be true? I mean, there's no way to really say. And whenever I...
Yeah, so I mean, like, that's why there has to be some fact checking and I guess sources provided type stuff. You know?
I've been vocally frustrated about this in public. I sometimes get a little bit of pushback, and people sometimes accuse me of defending Dan Schneider. And they say to me, hey, this is a bad guy. This is an awful guy. So why are you questioning these rumors about him?
I think the Sue thing is probably a big important.
And I would love to change that, but it's above my pay grade. And that doesn't stop being a reality just because it is more interesting to just treat truths and untruths as equally valid in the realm of discourse. And if you force me to sit here and go through 100 rumors with no source about things that people believe Dan Schneider might have done, all that accomplishes is it devalues the actual list of things that he very much almost certainly did do. And that list is not a list of good things. So I would prefer to focus on the stuff that has evidence.
He's really trying to be on like a knife's blade, a knife's blade, the edge of a knife's blade. Am I correct?
Dan Schneider, the brand.
I've never seen this video before, so okay.
Range of projects that Dan Schneider took part in.
I think we've all like I think we all know about Dan Schneider's allegations and stuff. I've never seen this video, so there might be something new. There might be something old. No clue. I just want to see what's going on because this seems fun.
Working on
it. Fun as in gaining knowledge, not fun as damn. This is more of a sad situation. But yeah, hopefully these people pay justice and stuff, you know.
Television. But when it comes to shows where Dan Schneider acted as a proper showrunner, he is most associated with 9 programs. All That, The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, Zoe 101, iCarly, Victorious, Sam and Cat, Henry Danger, and Game Shakers.
I forgot about Game Shakers and Henry Danger, because that's a little bit out of my realm.
This comes the reality that a lot of children grew up with this man's productions, and a lot of people still watch these shows to this very day. This is important because of the conversation of how intertwined Dan.
And here's the thing. With a lot of the skits on The Amanda Show, and even all that, they didn't really hit all the time. Like, it was kind of very hit or miss. Like some of the stuff I'm like, cool, I still enjoy the show. But there are a lot of skits where I'm like, even now, but even as a kid, I was like, that's just either not funny or that's just... like, it's like almost gross out humor. Which, I mean, I guess you have to be a particular kid to like that. Sometimes I wasn't into that. Like, we're talking like early 2000s. I was PS2 action stuff, not, you know, popcorn pants or something. I don't know. Whatever they had.
Schneider is with his writing. I'll be tackling my opinions on this.
Like, the irony was, I think one of the skits I liked the most, one of the in the Amanda Show, was the video rental store, and I think it had Drake Bell for the most part. A lot of the skits I liked in the Amanda Show. It was the video store rental place, and the dude bro surfer guy. Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, those are the ones I at least remember, and that's kind of crazy to think about that now.
Later, but in short, a lot of people have actively avoided crediting Dan Schneider for projects that they think highly of. And I think what this does is erase the very explicit brand that Schneider had successfully built up over the 20-some-odd years he was at the network. Now, in many ways, this was subtle and easy to miss when you were a kid. Even the most innocent stuff was borderline subliminal. But here's a quick example of what I'm talking about. In iCarly Season 2, Episode 5, I Go to Japan, we are shown the iWeb Awards, and specifically, we see several contestants go on the stage while the gang are stuck with security. In the background of this shot, we see a woman representing the best online cooking show. As the gang run inside, we
is that his wife? Right? Am I wrong?
Of this woman's segment.
Hey, that's enough shaking. The onions are ready for action.
If you listened closely there, you might have heard the specific stock audio file used whenever a special cameo happens in one of these shows. So who was this woman, and why was her cameo so important? Well, this is Lisa Lillian, the owner of the online brand Hungry Girl, which was also a TV show in the early 2010s.
Don't remember that at all. I don't think I remember that. But I kind of figured that on the iWeb video thing.
And she is
I just didn't know who she was.
Dan Schneider's wife. Dan
Okay, that I
Schneider
kind of
is a
knew
wife guy who made a
about that
joke on all of his shows of depicting his
a little
wife
bit.
as one of the most famous chefs in the world, with her show being watched by characters in several different shows. In fact, when the iCarly opening sequence starts, have you ever noticed this weird stock art of a brunette woman in the corner? As a kid, I always assumed this was supposed to be Carly, but
See, same. That's what I thought, because I was like, okay, brunette girl on iCarly.
it's not.
Made
That's
sense to me.
Dan Schneider's wife. Specifically, it's Lisa's art sona that she uses on her website
Art
and
sona.
her cookbooks.
Okay.
Now, an annoying trend I've found when you point out any fact
Would this be my art sona? The avatar I am using? The pirate.
about Dan Schneider is that everyone tries to read it as sounding sinister. You know, you put creepy background music behind it, you make the image black and white, and you do an invert effect, and it's like, oh, this is the most creepy thing. So I just want to be clear about this. There is nothing wrong with hiding your wife in the shows that you make. But I think it's a very interesting example of the many ways that Dan's presence is felt in these shows, even if he wasn't one of the actors. But
Yeah.
that is, of course, ignoring that sometimes he is an actor. For instance, alongside his Keenan and Kel guest episode, he appears as Mr. Bailey in Good Burger, Mr. Oldman in The Amanda Show, as the taxi driver in the Zoe 101 semi-finale Chasing Zoe, as the Secret Service agent in the Michelle Obama iCarly episode, and in the...
Okay, that is creepy. That is really creepy. Just him. Yeah. Yeah, that is creepy.
The iCarly finale, he cameos as the mechanic that Sam steals from. And in All That and The Amanda Show, he constantly appeared in several other guest roles, and occasionally as himself. To top this off, Schneider would do voice cameos in so many episodes of so many different shows that it is impossible to keep track of. His identifiable nasally yell can be heard in essentially every project he worked on from 1994 to 2018.
Ooh.
It's the Pagelli Hoocho!
Okay, you're the 9th caller, which means you've won 2 tickets and backstage passes to Zero Gravity. Welcome, yoga people. Namaste.
Really? Really? I mean, now that I hear his voice back to back to back, I completely understand. Dude, I did not know who the hell Dan Schneider was growing up. He was just the dude. I was like, okay, cool. Didn't recognize it. Learning so much now, though. Damn.
I wouldn't want it any other way.
Maximum dancing!
Love me.
He was also in Grand Theft Auto Vice City. But the most infamous example of
He
the
was?
references to Schneider are the subliminal ones, referencing Dan Warp.
Dan Warp. This was his Twitter, right? Oh, follow Dan Warp. Dan Warp.
Dan Warp is Schneider's official blog and social media brand. Here he would post behind-the-scenes information and personal stories. Specifically during the era of iCarly and Victorious, Dan had begun the practice of hiding Easter eggs referencing his own brand, under the guise that this would inspire viewers to follow him online. His handle was added to the logo of Schneider's Bakery, and
Oh, I didn't even notice that. I remember the Schneider's Bakery. Remember that?
iCarly characters would be seen wearing such shirts as Dan Warp Tweets and Follow Dan Warp. But the issue is grander than just
That I remember that. I just thought I thought it was a brand when I was a kid. I just thought it was like a brand. Like, oh, some dude. It's a brand.
The bigger conversation is about
In-network brand.
Nickelodeon promoting Schneider. Growing up, it was not uncommon for Nickelodeon to broadcast segments illustrating Schneider as the genius who single-handedly created a media empire.
That is true. So I remember Nickelodeon when I was younger, really going for Dan Schneider and behind the scenes of Fairy Odd Parents Day Phantom with Butch Hartman. Those two I remember constantly being shown.
Empire and shared universe. And why wouldn't they do this? Thanks to Schneider, they were making millions off of several iconic franchises, not to mention the international Nickelodeon stars that were created because of his work. But behind the scenes, things were never so simple. Part 2, the case against Dan Schneider. So a lot of people tend to discuss the allegations of Dan Schneider all at once and with some vagueness. And from my experience, this is typically done to build kind of a foundation of implication. To say, hey, here's a little bit of one piece of information and another piece of information. Now why don't you use your imagination and kind of think about what you think might have happened, you know, kind of in the sidelines there.
Okay.
I hate this. I think it's hackneyed, unjournalistic nonsense, and I will not be taking part. That's why I think it's important that we talk about the actual specifics of what has been said, and piece by piece. So first of all, we need to discuss the disastrous work culture on these shows. When you were hired on a Dan Schneider production, there was an expectation that you work long hours and you be available 24/7 if anything were to come up. The average weekday work session could go from 13 to 20 hours, and most weekends were spent at Dan's house trying to workshop ideas.
That is too much, and that is too much. I've worked jobs where I'm working like 6-7 days a week, but even I'm just like, what the hell? What the hell?
One specific claim made in a New York Times article is that Schneider would sometimes ask the other writers to wheel him around, literally wheel him around in his office chair from room to room so he could keep working on a laptop in between moving from place to place. Arthur Granstein, a writer on Drake and Josh...
What the fuck? I kind of want that now, but that's just that to me just feels like excessive power and lazy as shit. Like, is it really that hard to to close a laptop for like what, the 5-10 minutes it takes? Yeah.
iCarly and Victorious made this claim to the New York Times in 2021. I will always be grateful to Dan for taking a chance on me as a rash young writer fresh out of college, and for all I learned over the next 6 years. Much of my experience with him was a blast. He could be generous and validating, and it was exciting to be around his talent and passion for creating entertainment. But he was also unreasonably demanding, controlling, belittling, and vindictive, with a willful disregard for boundaries or workplace appropriateness. The best example of this that we now have was on Dan's first standalone television hit, The Amanda Show. When The Amanda Show first started, the showrunners hired 2 women for the writer's room, Christy Stratton and Jenny Kilgan. One of the main stipulations of them being hired was that they would work for a shared fee, both of them taking home half of what a male writer would be paid at that.
I still don't get that. Like, what the fuck? That's like you're taking a job. I mean, because you want to do it. It's your dream. You would do it if it's, the last thing you want to do. You're gonna do it, but that's just not right.
At time, on their very first day on set, Dan declared that women were incapable of being funny comedians, and he challenged the 2 of them to prove him wrong. The elephant in the room is that it is extremely ironic to declare that women can't be funny when you're the showrunner on a program called The Amanda Show, where the lead star is a teen female comedian. But
who is funny?
The
Amanda
Show wasn't actually the show Dan wanted to be making.
Was funny.
He wanted to be making Guys Like Us. The Amanda Show was just the only option he had left. Dan was the definition of someone with improper workplace boundaries. He was often cracking jokes at the expense of others, and especially the women, and he would even show pornography on the workplace computers. While Dan attempted to present him...
What the fuck? That's... Did I just, miss that? What the hell? I gotta be honest, how the fuck do you get away with, even half this shit? But how do you get away with that? How do you get away with that with people intentionally knowing that you're doing it?
Himself as just a big kid who was crafting a fun work environment, everyone quickly learned that he had a fierce temper that could change him in an instant. And when Dan walked into a room, you never knew which Dan you were going to get. And yet, Schneider was so successful and so massive at the network that many felt pleasing him was the only opportunity they had at continuing their careers. And one can only imagine that if the adults were walking on eggshells around him, the kids must have been feeling about the same. The cast members on All That and The Amanda Show were little kids, 12 to 14 years old for the most part. And they were spending those important developmental years worrying about financially supporting their families and continuing their careers after they stopped being cute little angels. The idea of trying to overload yourself with work to maximize the profit you can make off of your own youthfulness, it is a very unhealthy idea for a little kid trying to figure things out. And if there was something in the material that these kids didn't like that made them uncomfortable, they weren't going to go up against Schneider, because this was the guy who decided if they got a big line, if they got a special skit, and even if they got their own spin-off. And even the parents who saw what Dan was doing and didn't like it, they were scared to go up against him because they knew that would have an effect on their children's lives.
That's just insane to think about. Like, one dude has that much power over you in an industry. You can't go against him because you're probably never going to work again. Or at least, yeah. Because a lot of times, your best bet is to do a spinoff. That's insane.
Not to mention the fact that these kids were performing grueling hours, to the point that pretty much every week they were breaking child labor laws just to get that shoot in the can. And after The Amanda Show, this only got worse. To quote one of Dan's main editors, and this is taken from the Investigation Discovery Quiet on Set documentary, "When I worked with Dan, I felt like the bar was always being risen, and I had to reach that bar. You had to be as good or better, or put more hours in, or do longer things than Dan did. And we all did it, or you got fired. I would be editing from 8 a.m. to midnight. You didn't eat, you didn't go to the bathroom. One day, I keeled over, and I ended up having to go to the hospital."
Like, okay. And honestly, I can't even edit my own videos for that long. Because I can listen to my voice, but it's like just the editing just takes so much energy out of me. Because for editing, I can't be talking to y'all like this. Like, just to myself, it's just a weird, awkward thing with editing. And you have to make sure it's right, you have to make sure it's good, make sure the footage is nice, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just so much that I just wish could not be that, But oh well. I can't do that for 12 hours or longer. That was longer. That was like 14 hours. No bathroom breaks, no eating, no whatever. That's insane. Insanity to me. Fairly insane.
And as I'm leaving and curled over, I could hear someone say, "How is the show going to get finished?" But the worst story about Schneider's activity on set was when he asked Christy Stratton to act out being sodomized while telling a story about high school. Christy followed Dan's directions, to her utter humiliation. Jenny Kilgan witnessed this herself and recalled in the documentary, "It was probably the wrongest thing I've ever seen happen to a woman in a professional environment, ever." Later, Christy and Kilgan learned that it was actually against the rules of the Writers Guild of America for two writers to split a single wage. They complained to the union, who quickly came down on Schneider. Dan called up Kilgan, screaming at her and saying that if he found out that she was the one who sabotaged the show, she would...
How do you sabotage the show? Like, how is that a good excuse to not pay people what they're owed? Like, what? Like, that's a monster to me right there. Just that period. Everything else is cruel as well, but like, jeez. People just want to make it into industry and you're fucking abusing them? Hell.
Never work for Nickelodeon or Viacom ever again. Shortly after this, Dan fired Christy and Kilgan quit weeks later. The pair were replaced by a single male writer, Stephen Malaro, the future creator of Young Sheldon and None Pizza Left Beef. As
What?
dinky as the series might have been, writing for a series like The Amanda Show was a huge opportunity in the industry, which is why these stories are so disappointing. After quitting, Kilgan sued Schneider for gender discrimination, which was settled out of court. The third element we need to talk about is the proximity that Schneider had to many of his child stars. In the documentary Quiet on Set, various people from The Amanda Show recall how extremely close Schneider and Amanda were. She'd often be so close to him that they'd be borderline cuddling, and it wasn't uncommon for Schneider to receive back rubs from Amanda Bynes. This tendency
That is
for
so
him to physically
fucking
touch
weird.
his child stars is
Like, what the
present
hell?
in several very infamous photos. On top of this, his reputation for asking women on set for massages, be they adults or children, is well documented by many sources and is one of the most clear examples of sexual harassment from Schneider going across 2.5 decades, if not more. When Amanda Bynes attempted to emancipate herself from her family, Schneider sided with her. He allegedly offered her help in her court case and even offered her a place to stay with him and Lisa. This is a very tense topic to discuss because Amanda Bynes has a difficult relationship with her family, and I could definitely see someone making the case that if Bynes attempted to emancipate herself, Schneider supporting her could be a good thing or a bad thing, just really depending on how you look at it. As documented by several people, Dan certainly had a trend with the kids he would work with. He'd pick one person out, he'd tell them they were going to be a star with his help, and then he'd love bomb them with praise. Until time passed, he would become more passive about his investment in them, and then he would inevitably pick out a new kid to be his next starlet.
That's such a
really
weird
obvious
thing.
example, if we're talking about stuff in this miniseries, is that when Victoria started, Tori was presented as this ever-perfect golden child. But then as the show went on, the later seasons became very extensively deprecating at her expense. And that's a very frustrating example of this because, of course, a lot of Victoria's fans blame Victoria Justice. And I don't really understand why, because if it has to be said, Victoria Justice did not write the show Victorious. On top of this, Dan tended to keep the personal phone numbers of his cast members. He would often text them during off hours, as well as have dinner with them. He would even invite them all to his house for various holiday parties.
Look who's here.
Uh-oh, trouble.
McCurdy. Hello.
Hello.
Okay, that's she's like looking every way besides him.
Now, something I've seen a lot of people say is that because such poor boundaries were in place, something must have happened. But this is the wrong way to look at this. The correct logic is this: something could have happened, thus there should have been better boundaries. Overwhelmingly, the hardest part about hosting a discussion about this is that so many people believe that Dan Schneider is automatically guilty of child sex abuse. And it's not just that they believe it, it's that they need it to be true. And I don't know why, for the life of me. So when we talk about Dan Schneider and child abuse, please keep in mind that for the most part, we are talking about inappropriate boundaries and severe, intense, emotional abuse. In her book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, Jeanette McCurdy gives extensive descriptions of how the creator was on set. According to McCurdy, if an actor got a line wrong or messed up a take, it wasn't uncommon for Schneider to go into a fit of rage, screaming in the child's face, even when we're talking about actors as young as 6 years old. All that cast member Angelique Bates recalled to Business Insight.
I gotta be honest, if someone yelled at my kid like that, I would hit him. It would be like on site. Like, god damn.
A similar story about Schneider yelling at her after she messed up a sketch. This caused her to run off the set crying. When she joined all that, she was 14 years old. Amanda Show cast member Raquel Lee Boileau recalled similar situations during the Quiet on Set miniseries. Dan was like a tornado. He'd come in and like, whew, and you'd be like, wow, okay, what just happened? The set would not feel the same when he would leave because everyone was on their toes, scared. One of the most infamous examples of this was on the set of Zoe 101, as later recalled by Alexa Nicholas.
Ooh.
When Zoe 101 was in production, it's been said that there was kind of a cool kid clique that affected the atmosphere of the set. The main star of the show, Jamie Lynn Spears, was a former All That cast member and the sister of pop star Britney
Was she on All That?
Spears. And essentially,
I can't
everyone
remember.
on set wanted to be in her good graces, including the adults. Jamie Lynn allegedly decided that she didn't like Alexa very much, and so everybody on set was kind of going back and forth as you do as a teenager, picking sides and causing a bunch of, teen drama. Now, I will get flack for this, but when it comes to the discussion of who is to blame for a situation like this, I do not blame teenagers for acting like teenagers.
Yeah.
And I'm not really interested in getting mad at an adult because when they were 14, they acted 14. But in situations like this where there's going to be some...
I kind of feel that in some ways. Because, I mean, like, as a teen, dude, I was a stupid person. Very stupid. Very teenager-y. But now, I think I'm better as something. When you're older, you're better. You're not like that anymore. So I get that, right? Like, there are definitely mistakes. This is why social media is really weird these days. Whereas, like, you got teenagers actively documenting their lives early on to a wide audience of people, with like no real place to hide either, which is scary in my opinion. It's a scary thought. Like, imagine your grandchildren seeing how you like what you post on Facebook and stuff back in the day. I mean, there's the irony of a lot of the websites that we used back in the day, they were, bought, sold. MySpace was sold. I mean, now I think it's all it does is music now. And I think our MySpace pages are gone. So there's how much of that. Yo, thanks for the follow. But yeah, that's, we're now you have a bunch of teenagers acting like teenagers on the internet, and it's not great. Yeah, I don't know, but that's how we see it. Like, I'm not gonna blame teachers for acting like a teenager, but sometimes it's when they become an adult acting the same way, and they don't grow out of it. I think that's the discussion you probably should have.
So many kids on set. I think the adults who are there have responsibilities, and it's the same responsibilities that you would expect from a teacher or a counselor or a principal. And I think that really influences my opinion of what happened next. So one day on the Zoe 101 set, Alexa is minding her own business when who appears around a corner out of nowhere but Britney Spears. Britney has been debriefed by Jamie Lynn about all the on-set drama, and she has decided to put up a fight for her sister. So she goes up to Alexa.
I'm very curious, what the fuck was the okay, I get the onset drama. I want to know what the onset drama really was. Was it fighting? Was it was it verbal abuse? Was it physical abuse? Was it teenagers bullying? Another teenager. Because I can see that happening, especially like in a competitive business like acting. Yeah. I mean, I hope people, grow out of it, but yeah. And apologize.
And she starts screaming in her face until
Jesus.
Alexa is sobbing and crying, curled up in a fetal position on the ground. Now, I've been told that Britney actually reflects on this story in her autobiography, and that she was pregnant, and she really regrets it, and Britney's relationship with...
I think I actually read that. Okay. Then, okay, that makes sense.
Jamie Lynn is a whole other thing. So sometime later, Alexa is summoned to a chamber of executives. Her mother isn't there, but who
Chamber
is there
of Executives
is Dan Schneider. And Dan allegedly begins screaming in her face about what happened.
What the
and
fuck?
He yells specifically, the show's called Zoe 101, not Nicole 101. His stance is that Alexa is disposable, the show doesn't need her, and
they
because
replaced
of
her
that,
in a
she
season.
is in the wrong for any incidents that happen on set.
What the fuck?
Alexa, again, without her mother, is left crying in a room filled with adults who only want to scream at her. After this, she tells her mother she wants to quit, and Nickelodeon lets her out of her contract. If you walk away from this video only remembering one thing that I have said about this man, let it be this. The story of Dan Schneider is the classic cautionary tale of the honorary adults and the honorary cool kid. These actors Dan was working with, they believed themselves to be grown up. They might have been 13, 14, 15, 16, but they were in that space being creative. So in their minds, they might as well have been 21 or older. And so to them...
So I just think partly, Dan Schneider has had too much control. He wanted all this control. And it's just this formed into an abuse of power. Like, it's a power dynamic that he really felt comfortable doing. And I think, being able to write characters out, being able to scream at kids, I think that was his way of, dealing with probably trauma that he had. Not saying that's an excuse. More of like, yeah, he's a bad person. Probably keep an eye out for other people similar to him. Like, like... It's like when you can identify an abuse, an abuser, you probably could identify another abuser. Just the same patterns of abuse, coming out of other people. So I think that's what we should be on the lookout for. Dan Schneider, hopefully, received some type of justice, or the victims of Dan Schneider received justice against Dan Schneider. Yeah, is that phrase right? Yeah. No.
They were the same as all of these adults that they were supposed to be trusting. And Dan was the guy who believed himself to just be one of the kids. He was a part of the gang,
such a
and he just happened to be
weird way.
a bit of an old soul. And
That's
so
weird.
whenever there would be one of these classic cases where it was time for Dan to step up and be the adult in the room, he wouldn't do it. I think that's one of his biggest failings when it comes just to how he interacted with kids. And it's also incidentally why I think a lot of these former child stars, if not most of them, are totally shocked when all this bad stuff comes out about him. Because, oh, not Dan. Not our Daniel. Couldn't be precious Daniel. The next thing is probably one of the most infamous cases that can be made against Dan Schneider. The sexualization of the kids on his shows.
Yeah.
Now, I think this mostly falls into two main categories with a little bleed over between them. And the first is pretty much edgy jokes.
Oh, okay.
This is material that the writers probably would have
say
called
feet.
jokes for the parents, gags that have a little innuendo but kids won't pick up on. One of the earliest examples of this was on The Amanda Show, where Amanda Bynes played a character called Penelope Taint, and taint is, of course, a reference to genitalia. A lot of the other jokes are kind of defined by the fact that it's really hard to see if they were done on purpose. Even in the Quiet on Set documentary, I think they bring up a few examples where you kind of go, Excuse me if I don't just go down a huge list of potential innuendo in these shows, because I have just become so allergic to this topic in the past few years. And the reason is, so many examples people will bring up to you just aren't real. They're not real innuendo. It's just them not getting the joke or reading into the scene wrong or not going in with context. And I just have gotten so tired of those cases.
See, like, I don't know, because there's definitely very much certain innuendos in these shows. But the irony, though, is that there are a lot of adults that, like, even like now, right? We grew up with the shows. I guess because they're adults now. That we like the shows because we could still watch them and get some of those jokes. And we're like, oh, look at these jokes. How did this get through the censors? How did this happen? Blah 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 blah. And you know, like just a couple years ago, we were like, oh, that's funny. That's great. Now we're bashing it, and maybe because we're opening our eyes a little bit to seeing that, hey, maybe that's not great to have those kind of jokes with grown kids. Positive. That's a positive thing, I think. But also because I think also looking back, the audience for those shows was kids. Like we could say, yeah, it was a family show-ish, but they were on a kids network directed at kids because kids were going to watch the shows. It wasn't like on ABC or something that was very family, you know, wink wink type of jokes, where the whole family could get it. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some of those jokes in, you know, Fairly Odd Parents as well, and you know, Ned's Declassified probably, other shows within, you know, on Nickelodeon. And you know, that's cool, that's nice, that's great. But also, it's just a weird thing looking back at it. At least that's my opinion. Yeah.
I've also found that when it comes to stuff that is like 100% confirmed innuendo, no question about it, your mileage is going to vary about how much people care about that stuff, because half the time you'll go through all this effort and you'll explain this like hidden sex joke, and the person you're talking to will be like, huh, that's really funny. But especially in like Zoe 101, iCarly, and Victorious, there are a ton of like risque, edgy jokes. And the thing is, I remember when I was a kid, this was the reason I first kind of noticed that the Dan Schneider brand existed, even if I didn't know what to call it. I just remember that I used to watch Zoe 101 when I was really little, and I was just shocked by how often characters in those shows would like talk about their boobs, or they'd make jokes about puberty, or they'd just hang around in bikinis. And I thought it was so new and different and edgy and risque, and I thought it was cool. And then I grew up and I went like, oh, those jokes are kind of weird. Like,
okay, yeah. So yeah, that's kind of how, yeah, that's the thing. Like, as you know, because when we were kids, looking at the show, we're like, oh, that's cool. But then now, growing up, you're like, okay, yeah, it's a little weird. It's a little. You probably shouldn't doing that. I mean, yeah.
Specifically, I think it's strange to be working on a kids show with actual child stars,
yeah,
and to write them specific jokes about their boobs, and to have them deliver these jokes that were written about their boobs. I think that's a weird thing, and yet nowadays, when I see people post about like their favorite Zoe 101 jokes, their favorite Victorious jokes, it's those jokes that get posted because a lot of people still love that stuff. The second category is the explicit sexualization of teen stars. And there's like no humor, there's no irony, there's not a bit. It's just...
But that's the thing. I think it's because they're kid stars saying an adult joke. You know, adult to like, you know, yeah, like adult, early adulthood type, you know, late teens, like 18, 19 type stuff, you know, early 20s. But it's just weird.
Just sexualization, and that's it. I think you can definitely make the case that this became more of a thing in the 2010s when these shows started to have older cast members and they appealed to a bit of an older teen audience. That report by Business Insider claims that Nickelodeon and Schneider would have regular disputes about the outfits that were picked out for the cast members of Victorious. In one instance, a dispute surrounded a skirt that was being worn by a 17-year-old Victoria Justice. Nickelodeon wanted it longer to be more appropriate, but Dan liked it just the length it was. Eventually, they settled on a compromise of making it just 3 inches longer. A pretty common consensus was that at this point in his career...
That's just a weird thing. I want to know what the actor thought of that. Did the actor even know? Or the actress? Well, yeah, you know, actors, actress is even know about these disputes with with not the costume department, the executives. That seems very weird. Not just weird, but creepy. Like, what the fuck?
Schneider might have been a little frustrated.
Because wasn't Victoria Justice like the youngest in the cast? Or close to it, I think?
About how he was still stuck in the realm of kids' TV when he kind of wanted to make adult shows, and Victorious was kind of a way for him to experiment and push that envelope. And that especially seems true when it came to the way that he sexualized the women on that show. I think one of the most obvious examples of this is the season 1 episode where they get stuck in the RV and they're just locked in this RV during a heat wave and they're just lounging around
that was
in,
season 1?
bikinis, getting all sweaty and getting wet. And like I said at the time, it's a fan service episode. It is an episode for the people at home that wanted to look at that stuff. And it is very explicitly sexualization of the cast members on the show. And that's why I've always felt kind of awkward about this new culture where people are like nostalgically bragging about how Victorious was their sexual awakening. That's probably what they were going for, and that's not good. I don't like that. Obviously, the crossover between sexualization and innuendo is kind of big, and, you know, there's a bunch of stuff that could fall into one or the other. In the piece by Business Insider,
that was
Monet
definitely
recalls a scene
a weird
where
episode.
she was asked to eat a pickle while putting on lip gloss, and it seemed very obvious to her at the time that this was sexual and not appropriate for a teen audience, so she contacted Nickelodeon and suggested they not air the scene. And she was overruled, and the scene aired anyways. In Daniela's eyes, the show was mostly wholesome and funny, but these sexual moments did happen from time to time, and she personally blamed the male-dominated writer's room. She also made comments about how risque some of those outfits were, and how they weren't appropriate for teenagers.
Yeah.
Daniela wrapped up by saying, "Do I wish certain things, like, didn't have to be so sexualized? Yeah, 100%. Now, I think one of the most infamous examples of this is female characters having things sprayed in their faces.
Gross! Trina? I'm not gonna... Why should I...
What?
According to Alexa Nicholas, when a similar scene was filmed for Zoe 101, someone in the crew commented, "Haha, it's like a cum shot." Now, if someone actually said that, or it's just kind of her memory representing the energy of the room, it doesn't matter, because I think the intent is certainly there. Now, I think the final example I want to bring up of these inappropriate jokes are the various scenes in Victorious where we see adult characters interact with the teenagers and make some kind of comment about the age of consent.
So, what's your name?
I'm 16.
Later.
Hey, are you in college yet?
Bye.
This is a
What
very
the
common
fuck?
thing in those early
I remember
seasons.
this and being
The
like creeped out by
17-year-old
that.
Characters played by 17-year-old actors are constantly having adult characters played by adult actors comment on how hot they are.
Let me see this girl who, whoa, that is quite...
And it's at this point that I feel I must remind everyone of this especially weird clip from an extended DVD edit of an episode of iCarly.
What?
Oh, yeah. That's the stuff. Rub it around.
What the fuck? I kind of remember seeing that, maybe? That is so weird.
You like Italian food?
And yeah, it's weird to name a character for a 13-year-old after Taint. It's weird to write scenes for a kid's show where someone shoots moisturizer into a woman's face. It's weird to
Yeah, I picked up the moisturizer thing. What the fuck?
Put scenes in Victorious where you think Tori is going to get assaulted by a group of guys. It's weird to put jokes in Zoe 101 about the actors going through puberty. It's weird to put jokes in Victorious where the teenage characters are so hot that the adult characters are keeping track of age of consent laws. It's very, very weird. And it might not be illegal, but it's wrong. And now that we're broaching this topic of allegedly sexual moments in the material of Dan Schneider, let's talk about the B-plot from Victorious, Season 1, Episode 12, Kat's New Boyfriend. So in the story, Robbie is hanging out with the gang when he notices Trina is surrounded by several shruggers, who worship and rub her feet in total awe.
Like a cloud. It's like butter.
Yeah, I know.
Robbie asks what's up, and Trina reveals that she now has an extremely smooth foot. Robbie asks what her secret is, and she responds, fish. At the Vega household, we see Trina filling up a tank with imported puka fish. She reveals that they feed off of dead skin cells, meaning they perfectly clean the human foot of all waste. Robbie puts his feet in, and soon enough is getting this special treatment himself.
Oh, wow.
Soon, Andre is recruited into the practice, followed by Jade and Beck. Towards the end of the episode, Kat punches Tori in the face, leading them to go to the local hospital. There, they find all of their friends suffering from severe poisoning, which is the side effect of the puka fish.
But feel our feet.
Yes, I realize that they can nibble away all of the... Nurses, feel these kids' feet.
That's some weird... What is with the feet? Such a weird... Something is a foot? Okay. They made a whole section out of this? Okay.
So this is kind of a third tier of the allegations made against the content produced by Dan Schneider. There is innuendo, sexualization, and then alleged fetish content. The main problem with this conversation is that this topic has been the source of so much humor that it is hard to engage with this without it seeming like a big joke. But if you look at it in the worst way possible, which most do, it's not really funny at all because it's child exploitation, allegedly. Rule 1. There's also a huge level of ambiguity with this material, which I think is the main reason it was primarily left out of the Quiet on Set documentary. But this has been a primary focus of my research ever since I started this mess. So when I was watching iCarly, I wanted to find some way to represent how over-present this issue is in Dan Schneider's material. And so I actually kept a tally so I could come up with a number that I could then cite for this segment. And after all my research, this is the number. 28.
Huh?
There are 28 episodes of iCarly that do not feature some kind of weird foot thing.
Out of how many?
And to be completely transparent, the reason that number is so ridiculous is that for several seasons of the show, the feet moments would be edited into the opening sequence, so every time you start watching an episode, there it fucking is, right there, looping every single time. But if we decide that doesn't count, which is entirely valid, then the numbers play out like this. There are 97 episodes of iCarly. About 46 of those episodes have some kind of foot reference or foot joke or foot footage. Characters get their feet massaged, some get massaged with feet. Foot surgery is commonly name dropped.
I forgot he's having that foot surgery on Friday.
Real world kids show their feet in fan videos.
Oh, I forgot. This was Dan who uploaded these videos, or kids sent these in to Dan, I think. Such a weird thing, dude.
videos that are often featured. There's even a character named Sako who you could very easily claim is just one extended foot joke. Feet are so essential to the iCarly brand that in the episode where the Dingo channel rips them off, there is a foot reference on their pinboard of ideas to steal. And in I Go to Japan, the Japanese equivalent of iCarly has an obsession with gigantic hands. Now, there are two different perspectives to take on this topic, and I feel it is my duty to present both of these, partially because despite these being contradictory seeming, perspectives, I kind of believe both of these to some extent. It is difficult to talk about depictions of feet in children's media without first addressing the fact that we are in an unprecedented era of the average person on the planet being exposed to fetish culture on a daily basis against their will. I'm being completely serious about this. Think about this for a second. If you were suddenly, magically, in 1991, and you had the brain of someone from 1991, your average understanding of fetishes that you don't have, that you're not into, it would go way down. And I'm not trying to be sex negative. All I'm saying is that if you were a creative person in the 90s, it's entirely possible that you might think that, like, fart jokes are really edgy and funny. And you might write skits where you work in a bunch of fart jokes. And then, boom, 30 years later, people are accusing you of having a fart fetish. And you're like, I didn't know that was a thing back then. But now there's this huge sensitivity people have to any kind of media they see that might have a fetish if you look at it sideways. Like, oh, Junior with Arnold Schwarzenegger, that's M-Preg. The start to Harry Potter 3, that's inflation. Pac-Man, that's vor. And to give you a specific example of what I'm talking about, I think about a year ago, a SpongeBob clip went viral because it had a foot in it. And people were saying, oh, this is disgusting. This is a foot fetish being hidden in children's programming. And when you watched it, it was very obviously just gross out humor written and made by someone who thinks that feet are kind of funny. I don't personally believe that every foot joke is a fetish thing. And that's especially true when you remember that the old Nickelodeon brand was kind of the gross out, like, humor that the other networks wouldn't do.
Yeah, it's really
making
gross.
Jokes about farts and boogers, and yes, feet. And feet are gross. It's shock humor. It's supposed
like that's the thing. Like, even the slime they used, it was supposed to be gross. It was supposed to be, you got slimed. It was gross. It was sticky. That was the whole brand for a while. Now, is that a good brand? Who knows? I mean, they're not. I don't know if they're doing that well right now, but.
To be for little 12-year-old kids who think that stuff is funny. And so even when it comes to iCarly, I think when I look at moments like this...
I'm not here for your entertainment. I'm a foot. Leave me alone.
Oh, foot.
I could see you looking at that clip and saying, well, that's just shock humor. That's just supposed to be funny. That's not a fetish thing at all. And so going into this segment, I think it's natural to kind of assign hesitant, plausible deniability to all of this. Because sure, putting feet references and feet jokes and feet moments in almost half of the episodes of iCarly, that's weird. But an onlooker could easily say, oh yeah, that's weird, but the writers just thought it was funny. They were weird guys, It's not necessarily a malicious action by itself. And I think that is arguably totally fair until we get to Sam and Cat. Because there is a tweet that was put out by the official Sam and Cat Twitter, which is, for some reason, still up to this very day. And I kind of view this tweet as the smoking gun. And sometimes I think that no one would have reassessed this part of Dan Schneider's content if it wasn't for this one weird tweet. Sam and Cat tomorrow, right on the bottom of your foot, take a pic and use hashtag
This
Sam and
was
Cat Saturday.
weird. The irony, I think I remember seeing this when I was younger, because I didn't like Sam and Cat thing. I think that's when I fell off of Nickelodeon, like during that time. Probably within within that let's give like 2 or 3 years. Pretty sure I fell off of whatever that was, whatever Nickelodeon was at the time. It's just such a weird thing to see this though, because it's still up. I saw it recently. It is still up there, and it is insane. Like, the internet is forever at this point, and jeez.
Retweet and follow until our fingers get sore. So an appeal briefly to Rule 1, I don't want to get sued, so there's things I want to say about that tweet that I'm not going to. But what I will say with extreme precaution is that when you have been accused of putting feet fetish material into the children's programming that you make, it is extremely bad optics when someone logs into the social media account of the show you run and solicits children for photos of the bottom of their feet and then promises to follow back anyone who follows these instructions. And of course, I have to point out that Schneider is very infamous for putting out tweets on his personal account about the feet of his child stars. Pick! Carly tickles Sam's very unusual toes. If
What
you have
the
a moment,
fuck
will you
is
please
this?
name Sam's
Oh.
toes for us? Video! Would you...
I remember it. This, the Victoria Justice one. I remember this because I remember as a kid going to the Slap or whatever website that was, and it was just really weird. Like, the Slap was essentially like an offshoot of the Nickelodeon website. Like, it was adjacent to it. I don't think it was the actual Nickelodeon website. But it was just weird, you know?
You like to see Victoria Justice pour ketchup all over her feet? Well, here you go! The toe, recently adorned with a special toe flower, belongs to the sweet and hilariously talented Miss Jeanette McCurdy. At one point, he even mentions feet while flirting with his wife. At Hungry Girl, do you want to go for a drive? Do you want to go into our room and watch Too Cute? We have 4 on our DVR. I'll rub your feet. What the fuck is Too Cute? Oh my god. It's just a show where they show puppies and kittens? This is what they would watch? They just put on a show that's just cute animals?
Huh?
Jesus. I don't know what to feel about that. And as someone who's really studied this material, I truly think that it resembles fetish content in a major way that is hard to deny. And it's not just the presence of feet. It's the focus on shots of the bottom of the foot, of kids using their feet to do tasks, videos of kids sticking their feet in their mouths or in their noses and having ketchup and slime and whatever poured onto the bottom of their feet. And the important thing is that if we do read this as fetish content, it's even worse than what we've seen so far. Because the thing about sexualizing teenagers on network television is that it was often done to appeal to the young kids watching who were going through puberty. And it wasn't a Nickelodeon exclusive thing. It wasn't good, but it wasn't something that Nickelodeon invented. But the thing about feet fetishes is that they are not typically something you imagine as being on the wavelength of the average kid, and especially not the average kid back when these shows were on the air. And if this is all a misunderstanding, if this is all just rumors and people making up claims and people not understanding these scenes, it is again very bad optics that there is a character in Victorious who seems to personify all of the worst allegations against Dan Schneider.
You know, maybe I should just go.
Very well.
Oh,
But first,
yeah.
I'd like a foot massage.
What? No, I'm not giving you a foot massage.
I have embarrassing photos of you.
What? What kind of embarrassing photos?
They were taken from unflattering angles during your awkward phase.
Well, where are they?
You'll see when I post them on my blog.
No, why would you do that?
Because you refuse to give me a foot massage.
But I don't see why...
So wait, this character was written by Dan Schneider, which would make sense. But I don't get the whole personifying himself.
Oh yeah, Christopher Kane has an obsession with feet, and he asks women on the Victoria set to give him massages, and he threatens people if he doesn't get what he wants, and he embarrasses people on his public blogs. But those are just like jokes, man. Don't read too far into any of that. The thing is that due to my due diligence, I took a lot of notes about this topic, and I have a lot of weird clips I could show, specific examples of this, that kind of thing. But at some point, I get worried that people will think that it's funny, or that I will literally be uploading, like, from some vantage point, just a compilation of child exploitation. So I don't think there's a lot more I could say about the feet thing. I guess one of the final things I have to say is that there are truly some days where I think about this and I look at some of these clips and I'm not totally completely sure that Dan Schneider does have a foot fetish, because I think it could be possible that he's just this really eccentric guy who just really thinks feet are the funniest thing on the planet in such an over-exaggerated way that it just comes across weird to modern audiences. But when I was watching the show, I thought this stuff was easily the most disturbing material I came across. And I think that most days, I find it impossible to believe that this stuff is 100% innocent. I think this shit shouldn't have been made.
Damn.
I think this shit is very bad.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the short of it. Part 4. Bad act.
Can I say, he feels very uncomfortable in that seat. Just, yeah.
On set. So when we're talking about the general work environment of some of these shows, and not just the actions of one man, there are a couple other people that we need to briefly talk about. Starting off with the two least severe and probably most obscure. We know now that Sam & Cat was allegedly canceled on paper because of a sexual harassment allegation against one of the producers. We're pretty sure this wasn't Dan Schneider, but we don't know a lot of details outside of that. Secondly, we know that a writer on iCarly in his 30s started dating Jeanette McCurdy almost directly after she turned 18. But the most infamous problems came during the early years of Schneider's work, during the production of All That and its spin-off, The Amanda Show. So Jason Handy was a production assistant on these shows, and one of his main jobs was he would hang out with the kids and he would help them get from place to place, kind of take them around the set. Jason was known to be very friendly with all the kids on set. He supposedly had very positive energy, and no one really suspected him of anything. But in private, Jason Handy was a self-described pedophile. Jason would use his position on several shows, including those at Nickelodeon, to establish a form of contact with children and then attempt to isolate the children from their parents. And he would specifically not go after the main stars of the shows, but the kind of more obscure kids coming in to do guest performances for one episode, to stand in the back of a room as extras. He went after the kids who wanted to make it big and were looking for connections, looking for people who knew how to get them a successful career, and he took advantage of that. So he would start emailing them, texting them, writing them letters, and then he'd kind of get them out of the view of their parents, and then things would get sexual. When he was finally caught by the police, they searched his house, and they found plastic bags. And each plastic baggie was filled with letters from children and some kind of personal objects he had obtained, including, little things he'd been sent in the mail, and even things like underwear. And so, as soon as this was found out, he was obviously removed from all these shows, and he was put on trial.
Creepy.
He had assaulted children, he had kept up illicit conversations with children, and we're talking about kids as young as 6 years old.
Yeah, that's not right. What the fuck?
The second person we need to speak of here is Brian Peck. Brian was primarily a child dialogue coach who
apparently still hangs out
Nickelodeon shows. He had been in the industry for decades.
Apparently Brian Peck still hangs out with teenagers, which is creepy.
And had established connections with many young actors who are today quite famous. During the production of The Amanda Show, Brian Peck became interested in a teenage boy named Drake Bell. Drake at the time was being managed by his father, who initially did not take any concern at the presence of Brian, until he saw Drake and Brian get closer and closer, and Brian started to act inappropriately, and he started to get concerned. He went around on set and tried to ask around about Brian and talk about how he felt kind of uncomfortable with how touchy-feely he was and how close he seemed to be to Drake and all these things. But pretty much everyone on set told him that he was being ridiculous. Everyone knew Brian. He was gay, so people thought he was maybe being homophobic. And in fact, Brian Peck was such a popular person on set that he even had a cameo character on The Amanda Show named Pickle Boy, who was a character that would go around with a big tray of pickles, kind of bragging about how much he loves touching and feeling pickles. Drake's parents were divorced, and eventually Brian was able to manipulate not just Drake, but Drake's mother into fully cutting Drake's father out of his life. From then on out, Brian would essentially become Drake's new manager, taking him around to auditions and having him sleep over at Brian's house. This was until one day, when for the first time, Brian Peck sexually assaulted Drake Bell. Afterwards, Drake was overcome with guilt and embarrassment and shame, and he felt he couldn't tell anyone. And he also couldn't remove Brian from his life because that might tip off people that this thing had happened. And so the status quo continued, and Drake was continuously raped and abused by Brian Peck, until Drake finally broke down and told his mother the truth. Soon, the law came down on Brian for his repeated sexual abuse of a minor. Brian Peck's abuse did hit the news, but Bell was kept anonymous, and very few people in his circle knew what had happened. One exception to this was Dan Schneider, who immediately became guilty that this had been allowed to happen on one of his sets. He told Drake that he didn't need to talk about it if he didn't want to, but that Dan was willing to be there for him if he ever needed anything. At Brian Peck's trial, countless crew members and celebrities wrote letters in support of Brian Peck, many insinuating...
See, that's what I think. That I don't know. I think Dan Schneider's a horrible person, but I think he also found a way to get closer to some of the cast that he liked. And I feel like that was a way for him to get closer to Drake.
The only way this could have happened was if Drake Bell seduced Brian. Some even arrived in person to give statements in support.
How does that work out? Since Drake Bell was, what, like 14, 15? That is making no sense.
Of Brian and against Drake Bell. Dan Schneider was one of the few prominent people in the industry that stood by Drake Bell and helped him and his mother in their court case. After the trial, Brian Peck served only 16 months in jail. After being released, he registered as a sex offender and then was almost immediately hired to work on the Disney Channel series The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody.
That's
Finding
crazy.
Ultimate judgment for who is to blame in
That
cases
is crazy.
like this can
What the
be
hell?
hard. I do not think that Dan Schneider is responsible in any major way for what happened to Drake Bell. Brian Peck was hired by Tall and Robbins Productions. Dan Schneider had no role in the hiring process, and Brian Robbins was not a registered sex offender when he was hired to work on these shows. But I think it again speaks to this idea that when you're in a situation where you are in charge of a group of kids there are certain unique
I think he misspoke. I think he missed say Brian Peck.
Abilities that should be expected of you, which you would not have on a regular production. And one of those things is being able to recognize those red flags of potential abuse. If you're going after women in your writer's room because they harsh the vibe or because you think they're reporting you to the Writers Guild of America, then I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation that you're kind of paying attention to what the men on your set are getting up to and kind of how they're acting and how they're interacting with some of these kids. But I do also think that if it were a teacher or a principal or a counselor who had missed some of these red flags, I would not give them a lifetime judgment for that mistake. But what these stories certainly represent is that all of this matches very closely with that classic Nickelodeon standard of move fast, break things, and apologize 20 years later. There are two other things I want to talk about really quickly on this subject. The first is that I've had a lot of people try to pitch to me ways where you could read Dan Schneider's actions in this situation as like secretly malicious, like it was an example of his misogyny or his special treatment of his special stars. But the thing is, I think it's kind of a strange ordeal to want to believe that every single action Dan ever made in his entire life was secretly evil. Because I think the narrative you spin when you go down that path is that if Dan Schneider ever did anything good or nice or justifiable, that forgives the other stuff. And it absolutely...
I don't think it forgives anything else.
Doesn't. Just because Dan Schneider did the right thing in the Drake Bell case doesn't mean he doesn't deserve any criticism for all the...
I don't get how thinking because he did a couple good things makes it that he doesn't, that it retroactively takes away any of the negative things he's done. I don't
the other stuff we've talked about in this video. And the other thing I want to talk about is that it is so very obvious to me that the Quiet on Set documentary by Investigation Discovery absolutely lets Drake Bell off the hook when it comes to his own misconduct with minors. The cycle of abuse is a real thing.
What? Okay, so I didn't know this was going to go that way.
And it is tragic in a big way. But when Drake Bell was sexting 15-year-olds...
Wasn't that reported as not happening?
He was in his damn 30s, okay?
Okay.
So he is absolutely responsible for his actions.
Wasn't it proved that he didn't do that? Am I mistaken?
And I think it's a little too soon when he goes to trial and is sentenced, 3 years ago? That now everybody magically thinks that didn't happen. And the reason that...
Did it literally... Okay. Oh, okay.
The Quiet on Set documentary doesn't really go down that path or look at that angle is ironically the same bias that I think affects how a lot of the people that worked with Dan Schneider kind of look at this stuff. Which...
Okay, I gotta see the one. When was this made? Some editors, blah blah. I just want to clarify a little. Say Brian Robbins. Okay, so he did fix that. When I meant Brian Peck, it's one of the slips I didn't notice until after it was posted. We should have more time to review this for the 1 or 2 flubs like that, but for now, blah blah. That's great. Yeah, I guess not gonna mention. Okay. I am almost certain though that Drake Bell got sentenced to not that, but okay.
Which is that basically, if Drake Bell hadn't worked with the Quiet on Set documentary crew, they wouldn't have a finished documentary. I think the first episode of that documentary and even parts of the final episode are so very clearly stitched together and like missing stuff. And if they didn't have the Drake Bell interviews, it would be an absolute mess of a documentary. So they don't want to criticize Drake Bell for his own actions. And I think that's the same reason a lot of people in the industry privately don't have a problem with Dan Schneider. It's because
I disagree with this part of yeah.
You know, despite the rough times, they owe him something, you know. He's responsible for something they have in their lives, whether that's a good writing job or just the happy memories or being able to...
That's the thing. Like, okay, you can appreciate something that you got from somebody. Doesn't mean they're not a bad person. Like, does that make you a bad person because you appreciate what they gave you? Maybe. Perhaps. But you could also just say they're a bad person. And, yeah.
Watch these old shows. And, you know, it's just ironic to me that that same bias of not wanting to go after this guy that you feel like you kind of owe to some extent is very clearly present in the Quiet and On-Set documentary. Because I fully believe that not only does Drake Bell deserve to be criticized for what he got caught doing, not even what he did, what he got caught doing. Not only does he deserve to be criticized for that, in some cases he deserves to be made fun of it, and I don't regret making jokes about it, because this is a man in his 30s sexting 15-year-olds.
Did he do that, though? Like, because from what I am aware of, allegedly, the teenager lied about a lot of stuff and got caught in the court case and the trial of her claims. And later, it has now come out that some of her friends also disagreed with her story. So, at least allegedly, they disagreed with the story. So I don't know if I even agree with any of that. But, yeah.
It's not something you just sweep under the rug with a 30-second quote. To quickly get us caught back up to the present, in 2014, Dan Schneider was allegedly investigated for allegations of the on-set atmosphere on the show Sam and Cat. Because of Nickelodeon's findings and overall hesitancy about him, he was allegedly forced to no longer interact with his stars, now directing the series from a booth outside of the set and having people rush his orders back and forth between takes. This took the hours of filming on Sam and Cat from around 13 hours to more like 17 hours, and that's in a single day of filming. When Sam and Cat ended, several of the leads on the show were allegedly offered payouts if they agreed to never speak about in specifics the on-set atmosphere on that show. After 2014, photos of Schneider's on-set working on these shows are either extremely rare or non-existent. In 2018, rumors and allegations of Schneider committing sexual misconduct against his stars, alongside complaints of people on set, triggered another investigation. No evidence was found of the alleged sexual misconduct with his stars, but evidence of emotional abuse was found. After this, Schneider and the network went their separate ways, and he has never worked on television since. It is generally accepted that Schneider's current contract was broken by the network during this exchange, and he walked around with a final payout of about $7 million. I know for a fact that there's going to be people that misunderstand certain parts of this video, and I'm even anticipating that there's going to be certain parts that are going to be clipped and taken out of context and posted on social media by really upset people. So I feel I have to be absolutely direct and clear about this. I think a lot of videos about Dan Schneider set out with the goal of proving that Schneider did stuff that was bad enough that he should be in prison right now and forever. I've always felt this is kind of a really steep hill to try and climb, which probably affects how a lot of people cover certain bits of information. So for me, my only goal over the last 3 years has been to try and prove that not only was it justified to fire Dan Schneider in 2018, he arguably should have been fired far before then. And at this point, unless hell freezes over or the Daily Wire has a really stupid idea, Dan Schneider will never work in television again. I think this is for...
Here's the thing. If the Daily Wire gets Dan Schneider, that would be poetic justice beyond belief. I mean, you know what? I take that back. I completely take that back. Dan Schneider should not work ever in Hollywood or even right-wing media, because no one deserves that kind of abuse. Like, seriously.
For the best. Dan Schneider needs to go back to working in television like Drake Bell needs to go back to touring high schools around the country with his band.
Okay, so he's making a lot of jokes about Drake Bell. Okay. The irony, people loved Drake Bell touring high schools because that was like a thing that people looked forward to.
Part 5.
Also, let's get back. I think that was during Drake Bell's rockabilly peak or whatever.
Why this all matters. When I first started rewatching iCarly all those years ago for this series, one of the first takes that I came up with was so immediately controversial with everyone around me that I knew I had to hold on to it until this video. So here it is. This is my take. I think that Spencer Shea is a Dan Schneider stand-in. When I first told this theory to people in my circle, I got immediate backlash. And the reason is simple. Spencer is everyone's brother. He's the coolest possible materialization of what a father figure should be. How dare you insinuate that he has anything to do with Dan Schneider? But of course, he has something to do with Dan Schneider. He was created by Dan Schneider. He is Dan Schneider. Think about it. Who is Spencer? Well, he's an artist. He's a creative. But he's rejected from the circles of other adult creatives. And so with whom does he bide his time? Well, with the young creatives, the little kids who are so serious about their craft that they have decided that they are essentially the honorary adults in the room. And so Spencer has decided that he is fine with becoming the honorary cool kid. And so he spends all of his time fraternizing with the honorary adults. And he comforts them and he tells them, hey, you're like me and I'm like...
Isn't this awesome? But like, I think the big difference is like he's actually related by blood to one of the kids. Like, right? Like, outrageously acting, yes, but is inherently, related to one of the kids, and they're just like her friends. Like, yeah, friends, and he's also friends with one of the kids' mothers. That's his neighbor. That's the thing. I think there's a difference there. But
and when you look at these scenes, sometimes it doesn't seem like things are okay. Sometimes these kids are in explicit danger because of Spencer's impulsivity. And other times, there's not really any evidence that anything super bad is happening. But does that really make it all okay? And when you watch scenes like this...
I know you have a crush on me. What? Nothing.
We can easily rationalize that technically Spencer hasn't done anything illegal in that.
So that was a weird moment.
That situation. But shouldn't we expect him to be better anyways? Another example I came up with on a much more minor scale is Helen from Drake and Josh. In one of Helen's most memorable episodes, it turns out that when she was younger, she was the star of a sitcom for teenagers, and she forces some of the other characters to watch episodes of the show and see her youthful performances, which is the same backstory as Dan Schneider in the real world. This one really got people upset, and there was this overwhelming feeling of, oh, don't take Helen from me. I found this phenomenon fascinating, and it's one of the main things that inspired me to really study how people interact with these shows and the kind of discourse that you can see online. And this is why I created the running joke of Dan Schneider not existing. I was trying to make commentary on the way so many people insist upon not crediting him for his work when it's something they're sentimental about, when it's something like Spencer or Helen or Sako or anything else. When you look at those characters, people want to believe that they exist in a vacuum and they have no origin. Now, the sad reality is that some of these videos eventually became so popular that a lot of people online think that I single-handedly invented all discourse about these shows, and thus they assume that my own self-censorship didn't have a point at all, ever, which is really fun. It's really fun when you spend 8 months working on a video that has like a very direct point, and then thousands of people who didn't watch the video accuse you of not having a point, and then people in your audience defend you by saying, well, yeah, he doesn't have a point, but his videos are funny, and I fall asleep to them. Thank you. I'm so happy that's your defense of me. So to hammer home what my point was.
To be fair, yeah. That's, you know, you watch these like long videos. You're like, yeah, but I'm gonna fall asleep, right? You know, probably like 10 minutes in, you're just gonna go to sleep, and you're just gonna go to sleep.
I was never saying that it is good to just pretend that Dan Schneider doesn't exist. I was trying to hammer home the ridiculousness of this mentality. And how not only is it fruitless to try and watch shows like iCarly without thinking about the series creator, the further you get down the timeline of these shows, the more his presence is felt, even if you don't say his name.
Okay, so what I've learned is, do I like this video? Partially, yeah. Not all the time. Here's what I'm gonna do though. I think I'm going to I think I'm gonna play a game.